Most organizations begin their neuroinclusion journey the same way. They want to learn more about autism, ADHD, and other forms of neurodivergence. That's an important conversation, but I've come to believe it's the wrong place to start. In this episode, I want to explain why the questions leader asks often sets the direction for everything that follows. Hi, I'm Dr. Theresa Haskins, and welcome to Think Differently, the podcast that challenges the status quo and explores the power of neurodiversity to create a more inclusive and accessible world. Together, we will talk about everything from the value of different perspectives to the limitless potential of human beings. We'll explore how embracing differences can lead to endless possibilities and how you can maximize strengths to make a positive impact on the world. So sit back, relax, and join me as we get ready to think differently. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Think Differently. Today, I want to talk about a question I've been asked for years, probably since the first engagements I had with leaders who really wanted help learning about neurodiversity. Organizations reached out, and they'd say some version of the following statement. We want to become more neuroinclusive. Can you help our leaders understand autism or ADHD or dyslexia or some other form of neurodivergence so we can better help support these people? My answer is always yes. Leaders should absolutely understand neurodiversity. That's not in question. But over the years, I've noticed something. The organizations that make the greatest progress, the ones where you can actually feel the culture shift, not just see neurodiversity awareness programs and training and advertised initiatives, they don't start by asking what is autism or how do we manage employees with ADHD. They start by asking different questions, such as how do we best support our team? Or what type of leadership or culture do we need to achieve neurodiversity? On the surface, that may not sound like you're addressing neurodivergent inclusion in the workplace. But over time, I think a compliance approach to accommodate people because they have a diagnosis is different from truly understanding people and meeting them where they are. Now, that might sound like the same thing to some people. Teach me about neurodiversity, right, is usually the first request I get. But I don't think it should be. I think our culture of how we work here, whether there is psychological safety, whether or not people feel supported and respected for who they are, regardless of some demographic designation, is the whole ball game and where we need to start. And this is why so many people like me are moving away from the trap of starting with the diagnosis and discussions. Because here's what happens when organizations start with neurodivergence itself instead of focusing on leadership, culture, or teamwork. It's easy, even with the best intentions, to frame the entire conversation around understanding a different type of employee. If we know we have differences in how we communicate, approach work, how we may socialize and interact differently, then wanting to understand those differences is logical and fundamentally human. The thought is, if we can understand how people are different, then we can better understand what accommodations they might need and whether or not we can provide them. Many leaders genuinely want to better understand how neurodivergent people could fit into the workplace that we know wasn't built with them in mind. That's a great thing. But the issue I have is, why do we need to justify a problem in order to want to support someone? Why is empathy contingent on knowing and understanding the specifics of differences or a diagnosis? If someone needs a hand, do they really need to have paperwork to justify getting help? And I do want to be careful here because that's not wrong. Accommodations matter. Understanding neurotypes matters. Increasing awareness is important. But awareness doesn't always improve the basics that are required to begin with. A manager or educator who seeks to understand, a team or class who is patient and supportive. Because deficit-based mindsets can increase empathy, sympathy, But they can also lead people to operate in different ways because they feel the person is less capable, which is exactly the opposite of what we want. The other thing is it can create a sense of othering, a divide between us as the majority in the organizations versus them as the divergent minority. It quietly puts the burden of change and exposure on the person who is already navigating the most friction in the organization because they're different. The companies that seem to become the most inclusive understand something different. That the foundation isn't understanding employee variance. It's respecting them as realities that need support. That's the start. It's really focusing on your leadership and culture. So here's what I ask instead. How do your leaders communicate today? What are your team dynamics? How are expectations set? And are they set out loud? Or do people work based on unspoken rules and assumptions? Is psychological safety standard? Do people genuinely experience day to day that they can talk about problems, share the workload, and ask for help? Or is it a buzzword on a poster in the break room that we're aspiring to? Can someone ask a clarifying question without it being read as a red flag, or that they are not promotable or future leadership potential? Can someone think differently in a meeting without being labeled as difficult or counter to our culture? Do managers adapt how they lead to bring out the best in different people? Do they focus on strengths and arrange teams to offset weaknesses? Or is everyone quietly expected to perform the same way, communicate the same way, show enthusiasm the same way, and hide their imperfections and differences? Those aren't necessarily neurodiversity questions. Those are leadership questions. And that's exactly the point. They benefit everyone in the room, not just your neurodivergent employees. Yet they are the foundational requirements if neuroinclusion is the goal and what you seek to achieve. So here's something I've learned and have come to believe after years of consulting and teaching and studying organizational behavior on this topic. Inclusive cultures are not built on accommodations. They're built by leaders who are intentional, leaders who communicate clearly instead of assuming, leaders who lead with curiosity instead of assumption, who ask, "Help me understand," instead of, "Why can't you just?" Leaders who understand that fairness doesn't mean treating everyone identically. They know that difference between equity and outcome versus sameness in approaches and standardization as the marker of fairness. It means building an environment where people actually have the opportunity to contribute at their best, which sometimes looks different from person to person. This ability to help people from where they are to meet all unified goals is what I call neuroadaptive leadership. To be clear, neuroadaptive leadership isn't about becoming an expert in every neurotype that walks through the door. It's not a checklist. You don't need to know every type of neurodivergence and its nuance. It's not required to be a successful neuroinclusive leader. It is about building the leadership capacity to recognize that people think, process, communicate, and solve problems differently, and then intentionally adapting how you lead so that those differences become strengths instead of barriers. That's the shift. From managing differences to leveraging them. From creating a team where we come together utilizing our strengths instead of hyper-focusing on a problem area or how someone doesn't work the same way as everyone else. Ironically, many workplaces talk about building teams. I have never seen a sports team where every player had the same set of strengths, nor do they all play the exact same position, or when they do, is their approach exactly the same as the other players. Coaches don't expect that of athletes. We cultivate plays based on the players we have, and we utilize their strengths and position them for success. The work across all individuals is to work together to achieve the overarching goal. And that makes sense to all of us because we know that's how sports teams achieve success. So why is this not how we approach our people, our teams, as many say, at work. And so if this resonates with you, the question is, okay, so there is another way, not just to lead neurodivergent individuals, but to have more collaborative, stronger, and healthy teams. So where do you start? Well, if you're an organization, here's my honest answer. If you want to increase neurodiversity and you reach out to someone like me, you want to learn about autism? That's great. Yes, let's learn about autism. Let's learn about ADHD. Yes, let's understand what accommodations look like in practice, not just on paper, but you also need to be ready to start looking inward and around your company. I'm going to ask you to examine your leadership practices, examine your team culture, not the one written in values decks, the one people are experiencing on Tuesday afternoon in a status meeting. Their experience when an email comes after dinner and a paper is due tomorrow by noon. Examine the everyday behaviors that quietly tell people whether they belong, whether they're trusted, what we expect of them in how we work and when we work, and whether it's actually safe to think differently or say you need help, or even give it. Because in my experience, neuroinclusion isn't built on awareness alone. Actually, change in any domain rarely occurs because we're aware of the problem. Change doesn't come when we just learn about differences or acknowledge that there's an issue, but from an honest effort to assess where we are individually or as a group in relation to the ideal, and then making a true commitment to improve in the areas that show as gaps to achieving those goals. And that, like most changes, starts with leadership. So it really starts with the question most leaders do not ask. The question is not, what do we need to learn about neurodivergent people so we can include them? But rather, what kind of leaders do we need to become to effectively support them? That's the work. That's where it starts. And I'm here when you are ready. Thank you for listening to this episode of Think Differently. I hope you found our discussion today insightful and thought-provoking. I want to thank Audio Work Studios for their exceptional production and recording support. Without their expertise and dedication, this podcast would not be possible. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Your support helps us to reach new audiences and promote neurodiversity in our world. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite platform so that you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. We look forward to seeing you again soon on Think Differently.